What if the most important truths about who you are have never once appeared in the outside world? What if they were waiting, quietly, in the inner world you carry every moment of your life? Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychologist who mapped the depths of the psyche, believed that some people live more in this inner dimension than in the bustling world around them. And of all the psychological types he described, one stands apart as both rare and profoundly difficult to understand: the introverted intuitive. To meet such a person is to encounter mystery itself. Outwardly, they might seem distant, quiet, or even detached from reality. But beneath that surface lies a torrent of images, symbols, and insights that defy ordinary explanation. Jung himself admitted that the intuitive introvert lives a life difficult to understand, because what they perceive is not the material world, but something stranger: the hidden structures of the unconscious. For them, visions appear not as passing daydreams, but as facts, realities every bit as powerful as the objects we can touch with our hands. A conversation, a glance from a stranger, even the stillness of a room can summon forth an image so vivid it carries the weight of prophecy. In the span of seconds, they might glimpse a fragment of someone's biography, an archetypal scene from humanity's distant past, or a pattern that hints at what is yet to come. And yet, they rarely speak of it. Why? Because to reveal these inner visions is to risk ridicule, misunderstanding, even rejection. To the ordinary ear, their insights sound like strange poetry or riddles that make no sense. So they retreat into silence. They guard their inner world as though it were a sacred game, knowing that once exposed, its meaning could be lost. This silence is their burden, but also their strength. Imagine for a moment what it means to live like this. You walk into a room of strangers, and instead of faces and clothing, you see unfolding stories. Perhaps you sense grief etched into someone's posture, or catch an inner image of betrayal hovering over another. Sometimes you even know something that person has never told a soul. And here lies the danger. Should you speak it aloud, you may ignite conflict without ever intending to. Jung warned that the introverted intuitive can set the hat in the fire, meaning their words, if unguarded, can burn bridges instantly. This strange ability brings both isolation and fascination. On the one hand, they live with a sense of being perpetually misunderstood, their deepest truths invisible to the masses. On the other, they carry within them the seeds of cultural renewal, prophecy, and art. Jung wrote that without such people, there would have been no prophets in Israel, no seers to glimpse possibilities beyond the horizon of the ordinary. Yet the life of the introverted intuitive is not merely a blessing. It is also a curse, because their attention is drawn inward. They often neglect the demands of external reality. They can appear aloof, impractical, or even eccentric. To the extroverted world obsessed with results, they seem like dreamers lost in fruitless fantasies. And yet, in those very fantasies, entire civilizations have found their direction. The paradox of this type is stark. They are simultaneously indispensable to humanity's psychic economy, and yet chronically misunderstood by those around them. Their gift is to see what others cannot. Their burden is to live among people who often dismiss their vision as nonsense. What we are about to explore is not simply a psychological profile, but a journey into the strange, luminous, and often perilous world of the introverted intuitive. We will uncover why Jung considered this type so enigmatic, how they navigate human relationships, why they are prone to being undervalued, and how their visions draw upon the deep reservoir of the collective unconscious. As we move deeper, we will encounter their shadow side, their compensations, compulsions, and eccentricities. We will trace their creative power, their prophetic insights, and their role in shaping culture, religion, and art. And ultimately, We will ask what lessons this type holds for us today, in a world that prizes outward achievement but often ignores the riches of the inner life. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." The introverted intuitive lives in that awakening, constantly confronted with images that feel more real than the physical world. To study them is to be reminded that life is not only what we see, but also what we sense, imagine, and intuit. Prepare yourself, then, for a journey into the hidden dimension of the psyche, a realm where visions speak louder than facts, where silence hides prophetic knowledge, and where the misunderstood dreamer might just be carrying the key to our future. Carl Jung once said that the intuitive introvert sees most uncommon things, and that they dislike speaking of them, unless they are fools. This statement captures both the essence and the tragedy of this type. They live in a world rich with impressions, yet most of these impressions remain locked away in silence. The reason is simple. The moment they attempt to describe what they perceive, they are misunderstood. And misunderstanding, for the intuitive introvert, is not a minor inconvenience. It is the constant shadow haunting their existence. To understand why they are so difficult to grasp, we must first recognize what distinguishes them from their extroverted counterpart. The extroverted intuitive casts their gaze outward, scanning the world for opportunities, ideas, and possibilities. They are the gamblers, the entrepreneurs, the explorers of external potential. But the introverted intuitive turns inwards. Their compass points not to the horizon of external life, but to the depths of the unconscious. What they discover there are not material opportunities, but archetypal images, symbolic truths, and visions that shape meaning itself. This difference is subtle, but profound. To the untrained eye, the introverted intuitive might appear simply detached, distracted, or eccentric. They might sit in silence while others chatter, their gaze seemingly lost in the distance. Yet within that stillness, something is happening. Images are rising. Symbols are forming. They are perceiving not the outer facts, but the hidden structures beneath them. The ordinary world might appear dull to them, but the world within is alive, charged with mystery, and endlessly captivating. Jung emphasized that the intuitive introvert often carries an air of secrecy, not because they wish to deceive, but because language itself fails them. Imagine trying to explain a dream so vivid and strange that words distort it the moment they leave your mouth. That is the dilemma of this type. What they perceive is too immediate, too symbolic, too layered for the blunt instrument of speech, and so they retreat into silence, leaving others to puzzle over their aloofness. Yet, this very silence grants them power in human relationships. When they encounter someone new, they do not see merely a face or a posture. They see an inner image, a psychic impression that often reveals hidden truths. Jung observed that they can sometimes know important details of a stranger's biography without any rational explanation. It is as though the unconscious of the other person projects itself into their perception. This can be startling, even dangerous. To voice such an impression is to risk unsettling the other person, or even creating conflict. Hence, the intuitive introvert learns early to guard their perceptions, offering them sparingly, if at all. This guardedness can make them seem distant. Friends may feel they never fully open up. Colleagues may misread their silence as arrogance. In truth, they are simply protecting themselves and others from the intensity of their perceptions. For if every image that rose within them were spoken aloud, chaos might follow, and so they carry their visions privately, bearing both the burden and the gift of their inner life. There is another paradox at play. Though they may be withdrawn, they often command a strange fascination. People sense that there is something different about them, something hidden just beneath the surface. They may not be talkative, but their presence can feel charged, as though they are perceiving more than they reveal. This can inspire both trust and fear. Some are drawn to their quiet intensity, while others feel uneasy in their company, as though being silently observed by an invisible judge. The intuitive introvert's world is, in many ways, inaccessible to the average person. What they find fascinating often seems bizarre to others. They might spend hours contemplating an image that appeared in their mind, or tracing symbolic connections between events that no one else notices. Their conversations, when they do speak, may wander into strange territories: myth, dream, prophecy, or vision. For those who lack patience, it can sound like nonsense. For those who are willing to listen, however, it can feel like being given a glimpse into another dimension. And yet, as Jung pointed out, this peculiar orientation makes their lives unusually difficult. They are not easily understood. Their interests rarely align with the concerns of ordinary people. They may be undervalued in their communities, dismissed as impractical or strange. But this very detachment from the common world grants them a vantage point no one else possesses. They are able to see possibilities that others overlook, truths that lie hidden beneath the surface of appearances. The enigma of the intuitive introvert, then, lies in this duality. They are both isolated and indispensable. Their silence cuts them off from others, but their visions connect them to something greater than themselves, the deep well of the collective unconscious. In this sense, they live at the threshold between the personal and the universal, perceiving patterns that extend beyond their own lives into the fabric of human history itself. It is no wonder Jung admitted that this type is very difficult to understand. For how can we comprehend someone whose reality is not shaped by what is seen, but by what is sensed? Oh, to approach them is to enter a different logic, one not governed by the rules of the external world. They live in the realm of symbols, and symbols never submit easily to explanation. This enigma will only deepen as we explore further, because what begins as silence and secrecy soon reveals itself as something far more powerful: the ability to read the unseen, to glimpse the archetypal forces that shape both individual lives and the destiny of entire cultures. But before we arrive at those heights, we must first examine how this peculiar gift manifests itself in the form of inner images, psychic impressions, and visions that can alter the course of a life. The defining feature of the introverted intuitive is their uncanny relationship with inner images. To others, these visions may seem like fleeting fantasies, but to them, they arrive with the weight of undeniable reality. Jung emphasized that for the introverted intuitive, an image glimpsed within can be as tangible as an object grasped by the hand. The difference is not one of reality, but of domain. The intuitive sees into the psychic realm as clearly as the extroverted sensation type sees into the material. Consider what this means in practice. A casual conversation with a stranger might stir an image in the intuitive's mind, an image of abandonment, betrayal, or grief. Without explanation, the introverted intuitive suddenly knows something about that person, though they cannot say how. At times, this impression may prove eerily accurate. They may sense that someone carries a hidden sorrow, or that they are entangled in a conflict unknown to the outside world. Jung warned that such moments can be dangerous. For if the intuitive shares what they perceive without caution, they may spark alarm or suspicion. To tell someone their secret wounds without invitation is to trespass upon the most guarded parts of their soul. Because of this, the introverted intuitive learns restraint. They carry their impressions privately, speaking of them only in rare instances. Even then, they often soften their words, cloaking them in metaphor or symbolism. What appears as mystical language to the listener is, for them, the only way to convey truths that resist direct explanation, and so they are misinterpreted, not out of deception, but because what they perceive cannot be spoken plainly. This inner radar can feel like both a gift and a curse. On the one hand, it allows them to sense the psychological texture of those around them with remarkable accuracy. They can navigate relationships with a kind of second sight, knowing intuitively whom to trust and whom to avoid. On the other hand, this same ability isolates them. To constantly receive impressions that others cannot see is exhausting. To remain silent about them is painful, and yet to speak of them risks rejection. Thus, they live between expression and concealment, always balancing the inner vision with the outer world's incomprehension. Jung observed that sometimes their impressions reveal not only the present state of a person, but elements of their biography that the intuitive should have no way of knowing. Imagine meeting someone for the first time and instantly seeing an inner image of a childhood event, a trauma, or a turning point in their life. For the intuitive, such moments can be unsettling. They are not always aware that the information has surfaced from within themselves. They simply experience it as an immediate fact. When they voice it aloud, the reaction can be explosive. The person may feel exposed, violated, or disturbed, as though their innermost secrets had been laid bare without consent. This is why Jung described the introverted intuitive as playing with fire when they reveal their impressions. The hat is in the fire, he warned, when they blurt out what should have remained unsaid. It is not malice but innocence that drives them to speak, yet the consequences can be damaging. Friendships may fracture, trust may dissolve, reputations may suffer. In learning this lesson, many introverted intuitives retreat even further into silence, convinced that their visions are not meant to be shared. Yet, to call this ability mere fantasy would be a mistake. Jung insisted that these inner images are not empty illusions, but real manifestations of the unconscious. They are facts of the psyche, carrying information that, while not accessible through the five senses, nonetheless shapes human life. Just as a dream can alter the course of one's decisions, so too can an intuitive vision reveal truths that reason alone could never uncover. The paradox is that these images often feel detached from the self. The intuitive perceives them not as personal feelings, but as autonomous realities that stand on their own. To them, the image has its own existence, independent of the person experiencing it. They may see a symbolic scene, a man pierced by an arrow, a child standing at the edge of a forest, a figure descending into darkness, and feel as though they are merely witnesses to something unfolding, not creators of the vision. This quality of autonomy gives their inner world a haunting sense of objectivity. Such images fascinate and captivate the intuitive. They can spend hours, even days, pondering a single vision, watching how it unfolds and transforms in their imagination. To the outside observer, this may look like idleness or daydreaming. In truth, it is a form of profound engagement, an exploration of the unconscious as vivid as any journey across oceans or mountains. But this fascination comes with a cost. Because they are so absorbed by the inner world, introverted intuitives often neglect the external one. Practical tasks, material responsibilities, and everyday duties may feel trivial compared to the intensity of their inner perceptions. They risk appearing ungrounded, unreliable, or detached. Others may dismiss them as impractical dreamers. Yet history shows that many prophets, mystics, and visionaries, those who shaped cultures and inspired movements, were precisely of this type. What seems useless in the moment can prove invaluable across generations. It is here that the double-edged nature of their gift becomes clear. The same ability that isolates them from ordinary society also grants them access to a reservoir of insight that can guide humanity itself. The same visions that make them misunderstood by their neighbors may, in time, inspire art, philosophy, or even prophecy that reshapes civilization. The intuitive introvert lives with this tension daily. They carry within them a radar that scans not the outer world of objects, but the inner world of symbols. Every glance, every encounter, every silence holds the potential to release an image from the depths of the unconscious. To live with such constant perception is to walk on a knife's edge, blessed with insight, cursed with solitude. And yet, this is only the beginning, for these inner images are not mere curiosities, they are gateways. They lead beyond the personal unconscious into the collective unconscious where archetypes dwell. To understand the intuitive introvert fully, we must next follow them into that deeper terrain, the realm of archetypes, ancestral memory, and visions that reach far beyond the individual. To grasp the life of the introverted intuitive is to confront a paradox. Their vision is at once their greatest strength and their most painful weakness. On one hand, it allows them to perceive the hidden depths of human nature, to sense patterns invisible to others, and to glimpse possibilities before they become real. On the other, it distances them from ordinary life, often rendering them misunderstood, underestimated, or dismissed as eccentric. It is a double-edged sword, a gift that wounds as much as it empowers. The advantage of this vision is striking in human relationships. When an intuitive introvert meets someone, they often perceive more than words convey. They may intuitively sense motivations, fears, or conflicts that the person themselves has not fully acknowledged. In this way, they carry a kind of silent understanding that can be deeply comforting to those who feel seen. Imagine confiding in someone who seems to already know the shape of your struggle, someone who grasps the weight of your unspoken emotions. This is the healing side of their gift, the ability to resonate with the inner lives of others without judgment or demand. But this same sensitivity can backfire. The ordinary person does not expect to be known so deeply, so suddenly. What the intuitive perceives as simple fact may feel to the other as exposure, intrusion, even violation. To tell someone their hidden truth can be destabilizing, even offensive. Thus, the very insight that could foster understanding can also destroy trust. This is the curse of their perception. What makes them valuable can also make them dangerous. Jung himself recognized this tension. He wrote that the introverted intuitive often lives a difficult life, not because they lack talent, but because their perceptions cannot easily be translated into the language of the everyday world. Their insights arrive as symbols, images, or impressions, forms of knowledge that resist rational explanation. To share them is to risk being called delusional. To withhold them is to carry a private burden that isolates them from others. In either case, they remain outsiders, dwelling at the threshold of the seen and the unseen. Another edge of this sword is their relationship to reality itself. Because they are drawn to the inner world, the outer world often appears secondary. Practical tasks, material goals, and social conventions may strike them as trivial distractions. To an employer, this might look like irresponsibility. To a friend, it might feel like detachment. Yet for the intuitive introvert, these are the natural consequences of living in two worlds, one external, measured by facts and appearances, and one internal measured by images and meanings. This imbalance often creates friction. Society demands productivity, action, and conformity to external standards. The intuitive introvert, however, prioritizes inner coherence, symbolic resonance, and alignment with unseen truths. They may struggle to meet the demands of ordinary life, not because they are incapable, but because their attention is perpetually pulled inward. This tension can lead to misunderstanding, as others judge them by standards they never chose to embrace. Yet, the sword cuts both ways. For what seems impractical in the present may prove visionary in the future. History is filled with figures who were dismissed as dreamers in their time, only to be recognized later as prophets, artists, or innovators. Their visions, though incomprehensible to their contemporaries, contain seeds of cultural transformation. Without such people, Jung argued, civilizations would lack renewal. The prophets of Israel, the mystics of every tradition, the artists who reimagined human experience, all bear the marks of introverted intuition. The challenge, then, is not that their visions lack value, but that the world often fails to recognize it. They are like miners bringing up jewels from the depths, only to find their community blind to their worth. This constant devaluation leaves many intuitive introverts feeling alienated, even bitter. They may withdraw further into their inner world, convinced that no one will ever understand them. And yet, even in isolation, they cannot stop perceiving. The visions continue, relentless, pressing upon them with a force they cannot escape. Here lies another danger: intoxication with the inner world. Because the images are so captivating, the introverted intuitive may lose touch with external reality altogether. They can become dreamers detached from life, living more fully in fantasy than in fact. To others, they appear eccentric, impractical, even lost. Jung cautioned that this one-sidedness can lead to neurosis, as the neglected outer world retaliates through compulsions, anxieties, or physical symptoms. The double-edged sword cuts deep when balance is lost. And yet, for all these dangers, the gift cannot be dismissed. The introverted intuitive is indispensable precisely because they see what others cannot. In times of crisis, their visions can reveal paths forward. In times of stagnation, their insights can spark renewal. They may never fully fit into the structures of ordinary society, but they embody a dimension of human experience that society cannot do without. To live as an introverted intuitive is therefore to walk a narrow path between vision and alienation, insight and misunderstanding, prophecy and impracticality. It is to wield a sword that both protects and wounds, that grants power even as it demands sacrifice. Their life is not easy, but it is profoundly significant. The question that arises now is this: from where do these visions come? What is the source of the images that flood their inner world with such intensity? To answer that, we must turn to Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, the deep reservoir of archetypes and ancestral memories that underlies all human experience. For the intuitive introvert, this is not theory, it is lived reality. Their visions are not merely personal fantasies, they are glimpses into the very foundations of the human psyche. To truly understand the inner life of the introverted intuitive, we must step into one of Jung's most profound contributions to psychology, the concept of the collective unconscious. For this type, the unconscious is not a vague background force, but a living reality. It is a landscape they walk daily, a realm that provides them with the symbolic images and prophetic visions that shape their lives. Jung described the collective unconscious as a reservoir of psychic material inherited by all of humanity. Within it dwell the archetypes, the universal patterns, symbols, and motifs that appear in myths, dreams, and stories across cultures and centuries. These archetypes are not learned. They are given, woven into the very structure of the human psyche. They are the psychic DNA of our species, carrying the condensed experiences of countless generations. Most people encounter these archetypes in dreams or in myths without much reflection, but the introverted intuitive lives in their presence constantly. For them, archetypal images rise unbidden from the depths of the unconscious, appearing with a vividness that rivals sensory perception. A dream of a wise old man, a vision of a mother goddess, a sudden image of a hero's journey. These are not curiosities but facts, as real to them as a stone or a tree is to others. This direct relationship to archetypes grants the introverted intuitive a profound, if often unsettling, role in human culture. Jung noted that without such people, prophets would never have arisen in Israel, nor visionaries in any tradition. It is through them that archetypes speak most clearly, offering new possibilities for understanding life. They become conduits for the collective unconscious, translating its raw material into images, art, or insights that can guide society forward. But this role is not without peril. Archetypes are powerful forces. To confront them directly can overwhelm the individual, filling them with visions too intense to bear. Jung compared the archetype to a numinous power, a sacred presence that inspires awe and fear. For the introverted intuitive, these powers do not remain abstract. They break into consciousness, demanding attention, shaping perception, and sometimes destabilizing ordinary life. Consider the archetype of death and rebirth. In myth, it appears as the hero's descent into the underworld and eventual return. For the introverted intuitive, this archetype may erupt in the form of visions, a crumbling tower, a figure descending into darkness, an image of renewal after destruction. To the outside world, such visions may seem bizarre, but to the intuitive, they carry the weight of inevitability, as though they are witnessing the laws of existence themselves. This ability to perceive archetypes grants them foresight. They can often sense the direction of events before they unfold, not because they predict facts, but because they perceive the underlying patterns. Archetypes are the laws governing human experience, and to see them is to glimpse the shape of the future. This is why Jung claimed that introverted intuition has a prophetic quality. It does not forecast in details, but informs, seeing the storm before the first raindrop falls. Yet, once again, the gift carries a cost. To live among archetypes is to feel alienated from ordinary reality. Everyday concerns, money, schedules, routines, pale in comparison to the grandeur of these inner images. The intuitive introvert may feel frustrated that others do not share their urgency or depth. They may become impatient with the trivialities of social life, longing instead to remain immersed in their visions. To others, this detachment appears impractical, even strange. To the intuitive, it is a necessity. Archetypes also demand expression. The introverted intuitive who receives visions cannot simply ignore them. The images press for embodiment, for translation into art, philosophy, or action. This is why so many mystics, poets, and artists belong to this type. Their creations are not mere personal whims. They are attempts to give form to the archetypal currents moving through them. In this sense, their work belongs not to them alone, but to the collective. But expression is fraught with difficulty. Language and art are always limited, always partial. What the intuitive perceives is often too vast, too symbolic to be fully captured. This creates a perpetual tension. They feel compelled to express, yet dissatisfied with the result. Their visions remain richer than anything they can create, leaving them restless, forever chasing an impossible perfection. And yet, even imperfect expression can change the world. History shows that when archetypal images are successfully translated into cultural forms, they reshape civilization. Religions are born from visions of the divine. Movements arise from archetypes of the hero, the rebel, the savior. Works of art endure for centuries because they embody symbols that speak to the deepest layers of the human psyche. Without introverted intuitives to serve as channels, much of this would remain buried in the unconscious, unseen, and unrealized. Jung cautioned, however, that archetypes are not inherently benevolent. They are neutral forces, capable of creation or destruction. To engage them carelessly can lead to inflation, where the individual identifies too closely with the archetype and loses touch with reality. A person who mistakes themselves for a prophet, a chosen one, or a savior is in the grip of archetypal possession. This danger is particularly acute for the introverted intuitive, whose visions arrive with such force that they can easily mistake them for personal destiny. Balance, humility, and grounding are essential to protect against this trap. Thus, the life of the introverted intuitive is bound to the archetypes drawn to them, shaped by them, and at times endangered by them. They are both messengers and victims of the unconscious, carrying images that belong not only to themselves but to humanity at large. Their visions are windows into the timeless, but their challenge is to remain anchored in time, to translate the eternal into the language of the present. In seeing how archetypes shape their perception, we begin to understand why the introverted intuitive is both invaluable and misunderstood. They reveal possibilities that others cannot see, yet they themselves often struggle to live in the practical world. To explore this tension further, we must now turn to the shadow side of their nature, the repressed functions, compulsions, and eccentricities that arise when their vision dominates at the expense of balance. Every gift casts a shadow. For the introverted intuitive, the very function that allows them to perceive the depths of the unconscious also blinds them to much of the external world. Jung warned that when one function dominates, its opposite is pushed into the unconscious, where it festers in primitive, distorted forms. For the intuitive introvert, this means that while they soar in the realm of symbols and archetypes, their relationship to sensation, the raw experience of the body and material world, is often repressed and undeveloped. This repression manifests in peculiar ways. Because they neglect the senses, they can become strangely disconnected from physical reality. They may forget to eat, overlook practical responsibilities, or ignore the needs of their bodies until forced by illness to pay attention. When sensation finally breaks through from the unconscious, it does so in primitive and compulsive forms. Jung described this as extroverted sensation of an archaic character, a shadow that erupts as indulgence, compulsion, or hypersensitivity. Imagine a person who spends their days absorbed in visions, contemplating archetypes, and pondering symbols. Outwardly, they seem detached, even ascetic. But then, in sudden contrast, they plunge into compulsive indulgence, overeating, reckless pleasure-seeking, or fixation on sensory experiences. The very function they repressed comes back with force, demanding attention in ways that disrupt their lives. This is the balancing act of the psyche. What is denied returns, not as a gentle whisper, but as a disruptive scream. Another manifestation of this shadow is hypersensitivity. Because they suppress ordinary sensation, their bodies may respond with exaggerated reactions. They might become easily overwhelmed by noise, light, or physical discomfort. A small irritation that others would shrug off can feel unbearable to them. Hypochondria, too, is not uncommon, as they become acutely aware of minor disturbances in their bodies. This physical preoccupation is not their natural mode, but an intrusion of the repressed function, a shadow that undermines their balance. Beyond the physical, the shadow also shapes their relationships. The intuitive introvert, lost in visions, may appear indifferent to others. They can seem cold, detached, even dismissive, not out of malice, but because their attention is directed inward. Yet, because their inferior function is extroverted sensation, when it erupts, it often expresses itself in crude, archaic forms. They may suddenly act with tactlessness or insensitivity, shocking those around them with behavior out of character. What others see as brusque or repelling demeanor is often the unconscious shadow breaking through. This pattern creates a cycle of misunderstanding. The introverted intuitive does not realize how they appear to others. They believe they are simply withdrawn, yet those around them may experience them as cold, dismissive, or erratic. As a result, they are underestimated, undervalued, or even disliked, deepening their sense of alienation. They cannot understand why they are so often misunderstood, just as others cannot understand the strange combination of aloofness and sudden eccentricity they display. The shadow also breeds a peculiar danger, inflation. Because their visions are so vivid and archetypes so powerful, introverted intuitives may come to identify with the images they perceive. They may mistake symbolic visions for personal destiny, believing themselves chosen, prophetic, or messianic. This archetypal possession distorts their judgment, cutting them off from reality. Instead of serving as interpreters of the unconscious, they become consumed by it, proclaiming truths that alienate them further from society. At its extreme, this imbalance can lead to neurosis. Jung described the intuitive introvert's neurosis as a compulsion neurosis marked by hypersensitivity, hypochondria, and obsessive attachments to certain people or objects. The unconscious, neglected, and repressed breaks into consciousness in disruptive forms. The more one-sided the intuitive becomes, the more violently the shadow asserts itself. And yet, the shadow is not merely an enemy. It is also a teacher. The crises it brings are opportunities for balance, forcing the intuitive introvert to confront the neglected side of their being. The indulgences, compulsions, and hypersensitivities are signals from the psyche, urging them to ground themselves in reality. If heeded, these crises can bring growth. If ignored, they spiral into alienation and dysfunction. Jung emphasized that fate itself often delivers challenges to the introverted intuitive. External difficulties, illness, conflict, failure, serve to break the intoxication of their inner vision, forcing them to engage with reality. These trials, though painful, are necessary. Without them, the intuitive risks floating too far from the ground, lost in images while the world passes them by. The shadow, in this sense, ensures they remain tethered to life, even if by harsh means. To those around them, the intuitive introvert may remain an enigma. Their silence, secrecy, and eccentricities provoke suspicion. Their communications, when they do speak, often appear fragmented, episodic, or difficult to follow. Listeners struggle to grasp their meaning, as though trying to piece together a dream told in fragments. This lack of clarity only deepens the prejudice against them, reinforcing their reputation as impractical or strange. But beneath these misunderstandings lies a deeper truth. Their very faults reveal something essential about human civilization itself. We live in a culture that overvalues external achievement, instruction, and method, while neglecting the inner vision. The intuitive introvert's shadow shows us the cost of imbalance, not just for the individual, but for society as a whole. Their life becomes a living lesson, a demonstration of what happens when inner vision is pursued without grounding, and also of the danger of ignoring the inner life altogether. The shadow of the intuitive introvert is therefore not only their personal burden, but also their contribution to culture. By struggling with the imbalance between vision and reality, they reveal to us the need for balance in our own lives. They remind us that to live fully is to honor both the seen and the unseen. From this shadow, then, arises a question: how can this type, with all its burdens and eccentricities, still shape culture and history? The answer lies in the extraordinary creative and prophetic power of their visions, a power that, despite all difficulties, has inspired humanity across the ages. If the shadow of the introverted intuitive warns us of imbalance, the brilliance of this type shows us why they are indispensable to human life. For when their visions are not repressed or inflated, but expressed with discipline and imagination, they become a wellspring of prophecy and creativity. Jung believed that entire cultures depend on this type, because it is through them that the unconscious reveals new possibilities for the future. The prophetic quality of the introverted intuitive arises from their direct relationship to archetypes. Archetypes are not bound by the present moment. They are timeless patterns, expressing both the past and the potential of human experience. When the intuitive perceives them, they glimpse not only what is, but what might be. This is why their visions so often carry a sense of inevitability, as though they are looking at a page already written. Jung described their foresight as the ability to perceive the laws governing the course of all experienceable things. Consider the role of prophets in religious traditions. They did not predict events in the sense of naming times and dates. Rather, they revealed symbolic truths that later unfolded in history. Their visions spoke in archetypal language: destruction and renewal, exile and return, death and rebirth. The introverted intuitive functions in much the same way. They may not say, "This will happen tomorrow," but they sense the deep patterns moving beneath events, and from these patterns they know the general direction of what is to come. This prophetic foresight is not limited to religion. It also fuels artistic creation. The poet who sees into the heart of suffering, the painter who captures the dreams of a generation, the philosopher who articulates truths that reshape thought, all embody the power of introverted intuition. Their works endure not because they describe external facts, but because they give form to archetypes that resonate across cultures and centuries. Shakespeare's tragedies, for example, endure because they dramatize archetypal struggles, ambition, betrayal, revenge, that belong to humanity as such, not merely to his characters. The artist is, in many ways, the most balanced representative of the introverted intuitive, for instead of identifying with their visions, they shape them into works of art. By doing so, they prevent themselves from being consumed by archetypes while still giving them expression. The canvas, the poem, the symphony becomes the vessel through which their visions are shared. In this sense, art is not merely decoration. It is a bridge between the unconscious and the collective, allowing others to partake in the visions of the few. But not all intuitives channel their visions so constructively. Jung pointed out that alongside the artist stands the crank, the visionary who is shaped by their images rather than shaping them. For the crank, the vision becomes destiny, possession, obsession. They proclaim themselves chosen, their visions absolute truth. They lack the grounding of art or philosophy, and so their gift curdles into eccentricity. Society often dismisses them as mad, yet even in their distortion, they testify to the sheer force of archetypal perception. The distinction between artist and crank illustrates the precarious nature of introverted intuition. The same power that gives birth to masterpieces can also produce delusion. The difference lies in whether the individual can discipline their visions, translating them into forms others can understand, or whether they are swallowed by them, unable to distinguish self from symbol. This is why Jung insisted that balance is essential. Without judgment, the intuitive remains an aesthetic dreamer. With judgment, they may become a moral visionary, asking, "What does this vision mean for me, for the world?" When judgment enters the picture, introverted intuition moves beyond art into ethics. The intuitive begins to see their visions not merely as fascinating images, but as calls to action. They feel bound to embody their insights in life, to transform themselves and perhaps even society according to what they have perceived. Such individuals may become reformers, spiritual leaders, or moral pioneers. Their lives become symbolic acts, lived in service of the inner vision. Yet even here, the danger remains. To live symbolically is to risk becoming unintelligible to one's contemporaries. Their language becomes too subjective, their actions too strange. They may be dismissed, persecuted, or ignored. History shows us both sides, the visionary who is honored as a prophet and the visionary who dies misunderstood, only to be recognized generations later. Both share the same root in introverted intuition, Their fates diverge according to whether their visions find resonance in their culture. Despite these risks, the role of the introverted intuitive is irreplaceable. They are the ones who remind humanity that reality is not exhausted by the visible, that beneath the surface of events lies a symbolic order waiting to be perceived. They embody the truth that imagination is not mere fantasy but a mode of perception. Without such individuals, cultures stagnate. Without prophets, societies lose direction. Without artists, civilizations forget how to dream. Jung was emphatic. The introverted intuitive may seem strange, impractical, even useless from the standpoint of immediate utility. But in the long run, they are as indispensable to psychic life as the builders and warriors. They provide vision, and without vision, the people perish. Thus, the double-edged sword of their perception, when wielded with discipline, becomes a creative and prophetic power that shapes history itself. Their task is not easy. They must wrestle with archetypes, discipline their visions, and endure misunderstanding. But when they succeed, they become the bearers of new worlds, opening paths that others did not know existed. Having seen their prophetic and creative dimension, we must now turn to the next stage of their paradox: how society treats them. For even as they shape culture, they are often undervalued, dismissed, or forgotten in their own time. Why does the world so consistently misunderstand its visionaries? The answer lies in the problem of communication and in the tragic figure of the misunderstood genius. The story of the introverted intuitive is not complete without acknowledging the loneliness of their position. For as much as their visions can inspire and their creativity can shape culture, society rarely recognizes their worth in the moment. More often, they are misunderstood, underestimated, or dismissed entirely. Jung described them as figures who appear enigmatic, aloof, even repelling to their peers. Yet history later remembers them as geniuses, prophets, or pioneers. Between those two judgments lies the painful life of the misunderstood intuitive. The root of this misunderstanding lies in communication. The intuitive perceives symbols with crystalline clarity. But when they attempt to translate those symbols into words, the result is fragmented, episodic, and confusing to others. Their speech may wander into metaphor or imagery that feels strange to the literal-minded. They may skip from one impression to another without explaining the connections, leaving listeners bewildered. What is perfectly obvious to them appears nonsensical to those who lack the same vision. This gap creates frustration on both sides. The intuitive feels that others refuse to understand, while others feel that the intuitive cannot explain themselves clearly. Over time, this dynamic breeds alienation. The intuitive withdraws further into silence, convinced that communication is futile, while society reinforces its prejudice against them, branding them impractical, eccentric, or even unstable. And yet, within this very alienation lies the seed of genius. By being cut off from the crowd, the intuitive is free to follow their vision without compromise. They are not bound by convention or trapped by the expectations of others. Their distance from society becomes the space in which their originality flourishes. From this isolation, they produce works that speak not to the present alone, but to the timeless truths of the human psyche. Consider the history of visionaries. Many of them lived misunderstood lives. Mystics were persecuted as heretics. Artists died in poverty, only for their paintings to become priceless centuries later. Philosophers were ridiculed in their time, only to shape entire civilizations after their deaths. These stories repeat across cultures because society often fears what it cannot immediately comprehend. The introverted intuitive embodies truths that the present age is not yet ready to accept. Only in hindsight does the value become clear. This dynamic explains why the introverted intuitive so often appears as a tragic figure. They live in a perpetual tension between the richness of their inner world and the poverty of their outer reception. They are intoxicated by visions that feel more real than life, yet starved of recognition from those around them. Their tragedy is not that they lack insight, but that their insight is too advanced, too symbolic, or too strange for their contemporaries. Jung noted that these individuals often become enigmas to their immediate circle. Their families, friends, and colleagues cannot make sense of them. They may be labeled dreamers, eccentrics, or even fools. In reality, they are none of these. They are simply tuned to a different frequency, perceiving patterns invisible to others. But until those patterns manifest in ways the world can recognize, their brilliance remains cloaked in misunderstanding. There is also the danger of bitterness. To be chronically undervalued can breed resentment. Some intuitives retreat entirely, cutting themselves off from society in contempt. Others grow defensive, masking their visions with arrogance or disdain. These strategies protect them from pain, but also deepen their isolation. The very people who could benefit from their insights are pushed away, reinforcing the cycle of misunderstanding. Yet, even when unrecognized, the intuitive still contributes. Jung emphasized that their lives themselves are lessons. Even their faults, secrecy, aloofness, eccentricity, teach something essential about the human condition. They reveal that reality is not exhausted by facts, that imagination is not mere illusion, that vision has value even when unacknowledged. Their presence challenges the materialism of their age, reminding others of the unseen dimension of life. In this way, the misunderstood genius plays a paradoxical role. Their lack of recognition is itself a kind of testimony, showing us how resistant society is to the unfamiliar. Their alienation exposes the biases of their culture, which prizes clarity, method, and utility over mystery, symbolism, and vision. To encounter such a person is to be confronted with the limits of one's own worldview. This confrontation may feel uncomfortable, but it is also fertile. It plants seeds that may grow into new possibilities for thought and culture. It is important to recognize that not every introverted intuitive becomes a celebrated figure. Many live quiet lives, their visions unexpressed or unrecognized. They may never paint the masterpiece, write the book, or deliver the prophecy. Yet even in obscurity, their lives carry symbolic weight. They embody an alternative mode of being, one that resists the tyranny of the external world. Their very existence testifies to the reality of the inner dimension. Thus, the misunderstood genius is not only a tragedy but also a gift. Their struggle teaches us humility, reminding us that what appears strange or impractical may in time reveal itself as wisdom. Their alienation warns us of the dangers of conformity, showing how easily societies dismiss what they do not understand. And their persistence, even without recognition, demonstrates the resilience of the human spirit, which continues to dream, imagine, and intuit, even in the face of misunderstanding. From this recognition emerges the final question: what can we learn from the introverted intuitive today? In a world obsessed with external achievement, productivity, and spectacle, what does it mean to value the unseen, the symbolic, the prophetic? Jung believed that without this type, cultures would lose touch with the unconscious altogether. Their presence is not optional, but essential. To conclude our journey, we must explore the lessons their lives hold for us now, and how their vision can guide us toward a more balanced and meaningful existence. What, then, does the strange life of the introverted intuitive teach us today? We live in an era that celebrates extroversion, productivity, and measurable achievement. The external world is louder than ever, filled with constant information, endless tasks, and relentless demands for attention. In such a climate, the quiet, inward gaze of the intuitive introvert seems out of place, an anomaly, perhaps even a flaw. And yet Jung reminds us that this type is not a mistake of nature, but a necessity. Without them, a culture loses its connection to the unconscious, and with it, its source of renewal. The first lesson is the value of the inner world itself. Modern society often dismisses imagination as escapism, fantasy as indulgence, and introspection as weakness. But for the intuitive introvert, these are not luxuries. They are modes of perception. Their visions reveal truths that cannot be reached by logic or sense alone. They remind us that reality is not exhausted by what is measurable, that symbols carry power, and that meaning itself arises from the unseen depths of the psyche. In an age dominated by data, their perspective restores balance, insisting that not all truths can be quantified. The second lesson is humility. We are quick to judge what we do not understand, to label the unfamiliar as useless or strange. The fate of the introverted intuitive shows us the cost of such prejudice. Many of history's greatest visionaries were ignored or ridiculed in their lifetimes, only to be celebrated centuries later. Their stories warn us not to dismiss the voices at the margins, not to silence the dreamers and mystics whose contributions cannot yet be measured. To listen to them requires patience, openness, and the willingness to entertain what feels uncomfortable. The third lesson is balance. The life of the intuitive introvert demonstrates the dangers of one-sidedness. To live entirely in the inner world is to risk losing touch with reality, falling into neurosis, compulsion, or alienation. But to ignore the inner world is equally dangerous, leaving society trapped in materialism and blind to meaning. Balance requires honoring both sides, the visible and the invisible, the practical and the symbolic, the outer and the inner. This is not an easy task, but it is essential for psychological health, both for individuals and for cultures. The fourth lesson is courage. To be an introverted intuitive is to live misunderstood. It is to carry visions that few can accept, to endure alienation without surrendering one's truth. Their persistence teaches us the courage to honor our inner experiences, even when they defy convention. It challenges us to live symbolically, to see our lives not merely as chains of events, but as expressions of deeper patterns. In a world that prizes conformity, their example encourages authenticity, even when it costs acceptance. Finally, the life of the intuitive introvert reveals a profound truth about education and culture. Jung observed that we overvalue instruction, method, and external presentation, forgetting that it is life itself that educates. A child learns more from the lives of their parents than from their words. In the same way, the intuitive introvert teaches not primarily through lectures or arguments, but through the very shape of their existence. Their struggle with vision, shadow, and misunderstanding becomes a living lesson in the complexity of the human condition. So, what do we do with this knowledge? Jung offers a starting point to ask first of all whether we ourselves lean toward introversion or extroversion, sensation or intuition, thinking or feeling. This question opens the door to self-knowledge, helping us recognize both our gifts and our shadows. For those who find themselves resonating with the introverted intuitive, the challenge is to embrace their visions without being consumed by them, to give them form without mistaking them for destiny, and to balance them with the grounding of the outer world. For those who do not share this type, the challenge is different, but no less important to respect and learn from those who do. Instead of dismissing them as dreamers or eccentrics, we must recognize the cultural role they play. They are the seers, artists, and visionaries who remind us that life is more than survival, more than utility, more than the immediate present. They open the horizon of possibility, pointing toward futures we cannot yet imagine. Jung's words echo as both warning and invitation. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. The intuitive introvert lives in that awakening. Their life shows us that dreams are not merely escapes from reality, but gateways into it, revealing dimensions we would otherwise ignore. They awaken us to the fact that reality itself is symbolic, layered, and mysterious. In the end, the misunderstood intuitive is a mirror. They reflect back to us our own neglect of the inner world, our own fear of what cannot be measured. Their silence challenges our addiction to noise. Their visions challenge our obsession with facts. Their very existence confronts us with the possibility that the most important truths are not found outside, but within. As we close this exploration, we must ask ourselves, what would it mean to take their lessons seriously, to turn inward even for a moment, and listen to the images that rise from our own depths, to recognize that the unconscious is not a dead weight, but a living partner in our lives, to realize that within each of us lies a dimension as vast and mysterious as the outer universe. Perhaps then we would see that the introverted intuitive is not an anomaly at all, but a guide to the unseen, to the symbolic, to the eternal, within the fleeting, a guide to awakening.